July 10, 1942. A U.S. Navy PBY patrol aircraft is flying a routine reconnaissance sweep over Akutan Island in Alaska's Aleutian Chain when the crew spots something in the tall grass below. Something green. Something with wings. They circle lower. It is a Japanese Zero fighter, lying inverted in a marsh, its landing gear collapsed, its pilot still slumped in the cockpit. It appears almost undamaged. The crew reports the find immediately. Within days, a salvage team reaches Akutan Island. What they pull out of that marsh and ship to Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego will, within months, change the way American fighter pilots were trained to fight Japan's most feared aircraft, and set the template for how America would exploit captured Japanese weapons for the rest of the war. The Zero that the salvage team found on Akutan belonged to Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga, a pilot from the carrier Ryujo who had been part of the diversionary Japanese attack on Dutch Harbor, Alaska, on June 4, 1942, the same day American carriers were sinking 4 Japanese fleet carriers at Midway. Koga's aircraft took ground fire over Dutch Harbor, damaging its landing gear. Attempting to land on what appeared to be a flat grass surface on Akutan Island, the Zero flipped when its gear caught in the soft marsh. Koga did not survive. The aircraft itself, fuel still in the tanks, gunsight intact, engine undamaged, was in better condition than any Zero American intelligence had previously been able to examine. Up to that point in the war, the Zero was something close to a mystery. It had appeared over Pearl Harbor in December 1941 without adequate warning. It had dominated the air battles over the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, and the Philippines in the early months of the war, outmaneuvering and outrunning every Allied fighter it encountered. Allied pilots were filing combat reports describing a Japanese fighter with turning performance that seemed impossible, a carrier aircraft that could fly circles around purpose-built land-based fighters. American commanders were skeptical. The reports were not exaggerated. Restoration took until September 1942. At NAS North Island, Navy test pilots spent the following weeks flying the repaired Akutan Zero in detailed evaluation, first to understand its basic performance envelope, then in simulated combat against American F-4F Wildcats, P-38 Lightnings, and P-40 Warhawks flown by experienced pilots who were instructed to push the engagement as hard as possible. What they found confirmed the combat reports and added critical detail that hadn't been possible to observe under actual combat conditions. The Zero's turning radius at low and medium speeds was extraordinary. It could outturn every American fighter of the period on a level playing field. But it had specific and exploitable weaknesses. Its float-type carburetor couldn't handle negative gravity maneuvers. Pushing the stick forward sharply caused the engine to cut out momentarily, something that never happened with American fuel-injected engines. At speeds above 300 miles per hour, its ailerons became extremely heavy, dramatically reducing its roll rate. And its airframe, lightened to achieve its remarkable performance figures, had no armor protection for the pilot and no self-sealing fuel tanks. A single well-placed burst from an American .50 caliber machine gun was often enough to destroy it. The tactical guidance generated from the Akutan Zero evaluation was compiled into a classified report and distributed to every American fighter unit in the Pacific by autumn 1942. Do not attempt to outturn a Zero in a slow, sustained turning engagement. Dive away at high speed instead, using the Zero's heavy ailerons and the American engine's fuel injection to build separation. Then re-engage on American terms. The Zero's unprotected airframe and unprotected fuel tanks meant that when it was hit, it burned. American fighters that flew to those specifications instead of trying to match the Zero turn for turn reported dramatically better results. The pilot who died in that Alaskan marsh in June 1942 inadvertently handed the United States Navy one of the most valuable pieces of aviation intelligence of the entire Pacific War, and it cost America nothing to exploit. The Akutan Zero established the template. For the rest of the war, capturing Japanese weapons intact, or as close to intact as combat conditions allowed, was assigned explicit priority. Dedicated intelligence teams accompanied combat units across the Pacific with orders to secure Japanese equipment before it could be destroyed. Aircraft that had force-landed or crash-landed were examined in the field before salvage. Captured naval facilities were searched for technical documents, blueprints, and equipment specifications. And everything of significance was shipped to evaluation centers, primarily Aberdeen Proving Ground for ground equipment and Wright Field and the Naval Air Test Center for aircraft, where it was tested against American equivalents with results that surprised almost everyone involved. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, American evaluators had accumulated substantial experience with Japanese weapons across every category. Some of what they found confirmed existing assessments. Some of it significantly revised them. And a small portion revealed that Japan had been fielding equipment that American intelligence had systematically underestimated. Japanese ground weapons received detailed evaluation at Aberdeen Proving Ground, where the results were generally unflattering to Japan's industrial and engineering programs. The Type 95 Hago light tank, Japan's most widely produced armored vehicle, was found to have armor of 12 mm on its sides and 6 mm on its roof, thicknesses that American anti-tank rifles could penetrate at close range, let alone any anti-tank gun in the American inventory. The Sherman tank's 75 mm gun could defeat the Hago's frontal armor at any combat range the vehicle was likely to encounter. Japan's main battle tank throughout the war, the Type 97 Chiha, was only marginally better. Its 57 mm main gun could not penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at any practical range, while the Sherman could destroy a Chiha from over 1,000 meters. American armor officers who reviewed the Aberdeen assessments noted that Japan had entered and fought the entire war with tanks that were, by 1941 standards, already a generation behind Allied equivalents. Japanese industry had never prioritized tank development the way Germany or the Soviet Union had, and the Pacific Theater's geography, island fighting, jungle, limited tank country, had delayed the consequences of that decision until it was too late to correct. Japanese small arms told a more mixed story. The Type 99 Arisaka rifle was assessed as well-made and accurate, with a stronger action than many contemporary designs. American ordnance engineers at Aberdeen noted that the Type 99's bolt was among the strongest of any bolt-action rifle evaluated during the war, from any nation, capable of handling significantly higher chamber pressures than its standard 7.7 mm ammunition required. This finding was counterintuitive to American evaluators who had been conditioned by wartime assessments emphasizing Japanese industrial inferiority, and it prompted a more careful re-examination of other Japanese small arms that initial assessments had dismissed. The Type 14 Nambu pistol, Japan's standard officer sidearm, was assessed more harshly. Its grip angle, trigger mechanism, and safety design were considered inferior to American equivalents, and its 8 mm cartridge was significantly less powerful than the .45 ACP round in the M1911 pistol. Japan's light machine guns, the Type 96 and Type 99, were functional but considered overcomplicated for field maintenance, requiring tools and training time that simplified equivalents like the American bar did not. Japanese aircraft evaluation produced the most significant post-war findings. Operation Sunset, the systematic post-war evaluation program organized in the months following Japan's surrender, assessing Japanese aircraft at Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland and Wright Field in Ohio, went further than the mid-war evaluations had been able to, examining not just isolated examples but systematic comparisons across multiple aircraft types, flown by the same test pilots against the same American equivalents in controlled conditions. The program examined over 20 Japanese aircraft types and generated reports that shaped American assessments of Japan's aviation capability for years afterward. The Kawanishi N-1K-2 J Shidenkai, known to Allied pilots as George, was assessed by American test pilots as an exceptional aircraft, highly maneuverable, well-armed, and competitive with the best American carrier fighters of the war. The Naima Ki-84 Hay-8, known as Frank, received similar assessments from Army Air Force's evaluators, fast, maneuverable, and capable of matching P-51 Mustangs under the right conditions. The consistent finding from Operation Sunset was that Japan's best late-war aircraft designs were genuinely competitive with American equivalents. The problem was that Japan had been unable to produce them in meaningful numbers and unable to train pilots to fly them effectively after losing its experienced aviators in the carrier battles of 1942 and 1944. One captured Japanese aircraft required no evaluation to establish its significance. The Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, a rocket-powered, pilot-guided weapon designed to be carried under a Mitsubishi G4M bomber and released toward Allied ships, was the most extreme expression of Japan's late-war approach to the problem of American naval superiority. Carrying an 1,800-kilogram warhead and powered by solid-fuel rockets that accelerated it to over 600 miles per hour in its terminal dive, it was essentially impossible to intercept once released. American evaluators who examined captured Oka examined them with a combination of military interest and what the evaluation reports carefully described as respect for the engineering. The primary finding was that the weapon's mother aircraft, the G4M, was so vulnerable to interception before it could close to release range that the Oka's terminal performance rarely mattered. The concept was effective. The delivery system was the weakness. Of all the Japanese weapons evaluated by American forces during and after the war, the one that produced the most significant revision of wartime understanding was not an aircraft or a tank. It was a torpedo. The Type 93 Long Lance torpedo was, by the technical standards of the Second World War, a masterpiece of naval engineering. It was 24 inches in diameter, larger than the standard American 21-inch torpedo. It ran on pure oxygen rather than compressed air, eliminating the visible wake that air-powered torpedoes left behind and dramatically increasing its range. At 36 knots, it could travel 22 miles. At 48 knots, optimized for attack runs, it could travel 11 miles. No American, British, or German torpedo of the period came close to matching those specifications. The standard American Mark 15 destroyer torpedo had a maximum range of approximately 9 miles at 26.5 knots, and that was under ideal conditions. The significance of this gap became clear only when American naval historians and intelligence analysts worked backward from the night battles around Guadalcanal in 1942 and 1943. At the Battle of Savo Island in August 1942, at the Battle of Tassafaronga in November 1942, and in a series of night engagements through the Guadalcanal campaign, Japanese destroyers had devastated American cruiser forces in ways that seemed tactically inexplicable at the time. Japanese ships were hitting American vessels at ranges and in conditions where American torpedoes couldn't have reached. The post-engagement analyses filed by American commanders had concluded that Japanese gunnery must have been extraordinarily accurate, or that the Japanese had used unusual tactics, because the alternative, that Japanese torpedoes had ranges twice those of American equivalents, was not something American naval doctrine had planned for. The evaluation of captured Long Lance torpedoes confirmed the alternative. Japan had deployed a torpedo so superior to Allied equivalents that it had functionally changed the tactical geometry of night surface engagements without American commanders fully understanding what was happening. Post-war assessments concluded that better Allied understanding of the Long Lance's performance before and during the Guadalcanal campaign could have significantly changed the tactical decisions made during those battles. The knowledge came too late to affect the war's outcome, but it dramatically affected post-war American torpedo development, contributing to programs that eventually produced weapons with performance characteristics that American naval engineers had previously not attempted to match. The physical fate of captured Japanese weapons followed patterns similar to what had happened with German equipment: evaluation, documentation, and then mostly disposal. Aberdeen's outdoor display included Japanese armored vehicles alongside their German counterparts, and these deteriorated through the same decades of weather exposure and institutional neglect. Japanese aircraft fared somewhat better in museum collections. The Akutan Zero itself was lost, damaged beyond repair in a hangar fire in early 1945 before a formal museum transfer could be arranged, but other examples of the Zero were preserved, and a fully restored A6M0 currently on display at the National Air and Space Museum's Udvarhazy Center is the most visited surviving example of the aircraft that shaped the Pacific Air War's first 2 years. An Oka rocket-powered weapon is displayed at Udvarhazy alongside it. A Kohayatiki-class midget submarine recovered from Pearl Harbor, one of 5 that participated in the December 7th attack, is displayed at the USS Bofin Submarine Museum in Honolulu, the only surviving example from that specific mission. A Caton human torpedo is displayed at the Naval Undersea Museum in Keyport, Washington. These objects, scattered across American military and naval museums, represent a fraction of the Japanese weapons inventory that American forces captured, evaluated, and mostly scrapped across 3.5 years of Pacific warfare. The most widely distributed captured Japanese weapons in America today are not in any museum. They are in private collections. The swords. General Douglas MacArthur's surrender arrangements required Japanese officers to surrender their swords as part of the formal capitulation process, and American soldiers across the Pacific brought katanas, tanto, and wakizashi home as personal souvenirs in numbers that historians estimate in the hundreds of thousands. The Japanese sword became the defining artifact of the American Pacific Veterans War experience, appearing in family collections, estate sales, and antique dealers across the country for decades afterward. Many are still in circulation today, some of them carrying blades made by smiths working in traditions stretching back centuries, passing through American hands because a war ended and a general decided that officers would surrender their swords. The weapons that weren't swords, the torpedoes, the tanks, the aircraft, were evaluated, documented, and mostly destroyed. The reports they generated fed into American weapons development programs through the 1950s and 1960s. What they revealed about Japan's military technology was more complicated than wartime propaganda had suggested. A nation that had produced extraordinary individual designs, deployed them with remarkable tactical skill, and ultimately lost a war of industrial attrition against an opponent it could not outproduce regardless of what individual weapons could do.